Might be asking you guys all sorts of questions, but all right, I'm going to share my screen because I do have more visuals this week. Woohoo. So, welcome back, viewers and listeners, to part 2 of this book study series. In this episode, we'll be discussing chapters 2 and 3 of Getting to Neutral by Trevor Moawad. I was actually kind of hesitant on how to pronounce his last name, so I actually watched a couple of his YouTube videos with some coaches today and confirmed that his last name is Moawad. You can find all these episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube at Mr. Olson's class. I jokingly say that some of my students say they subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'm like, there's really nothing on there other than podcast stuff. So wherever you're joining us, thanks for joining and tuning into The Enthusiasm is Our Jam podcast. Today, it'll be myself, Kyler Olson, elementary school teacher, Bismarck Public Schools, Patrick Thomas, elementary teacher in the Nashville, Tennessee area, Daniel Perichin, got to make sure I pronounce that correctly for the 100th time, middle school teacher in California, the Fresno area. And we have 2 others that are unable to join us tonight. But we also have Rhonda Olson, athletic trainer for Sanford Sports. She is longtime former athletic trainer at the University of Mary. And there are some major touching points based on kind of how the college athletics calendar operated during the COVID era that I am looking for, because not just the overall thought and idea of how it operated during the worst possible time in history, but kind of how people who worked on college campuses during the COVID era were kind of put in a really, really bad spot. I know the whole world was in a bad spot, but as a coach, as a trainer, as an athlete, had to have been a nightmare of a time for what your limitations were and how you get in the right headspace to keep yourself under control, keep your athletes under control, because a lot of those athletes weren't even able to be on campus. So with our participants today, I feel like we're just a nurse, engineer, and a stay-at-home mom away from being qualified to be an online graduate course right now. So just wanted to throw that one out there. So with a larger crowd for today's episode, let's get right to it. Let's dive right into chapter 2. Here are all of our people. Sorry, I get carried away with my notes and then I don't actually throw them up on the screen. This is more so just for the viewers who are checking it out on YouTube. We are down Miss Lund today, as well as Coach Silbernagel. I'm sure he will join at some point too. And once again, my mom, Rhonda Olson, athletic trainer with Sanford Sports, is joining us tonight. So getting to chapter 2, how to downshift to neutral. I'll share some of my notes. I know the ones I highlighted on here are more so what I wrote down. So obviously you guys might not have the same thing. So you guys can, of course, touch on whatever you would like to. How to downshift to neutral. I have he starts going in for his checkups with his cancer, his chemotherapy, and as awful as a time in history that he has cancer, when COVID starts hitting, he still, I think his job really helps him with what he needs to do right now and not looking ahead, not looking backwards, not feeling bad for himself. Just my reference, I have on page 38, he didn't want to see his charts and scans. He wanted the facts from the experts. So I have facts versus hope and perception. And I know we touched a lot on that in chapter 1, because that is what neutral thinking is. You're not hoping, you're not imagining, you're not assuming, you're not having superstitions. You are focused on the facts and what can make this situation better, what I need to do next to create the best situation for myself. So I liked that he didn't go on Google for all of his answers and look up all the good things, all the bad things that could happen. And I also wrote down relatable, because recently I've had some family just kind of in a situation, not horrible situation, but situations that we weren't really sure what comes next. And I can't really say, other than kind of the going to appointments, being in annoying appointments that you sometimes not sure why you're there in a sense. You just have people telling you the same thing over and over, and just a little more positivity each time. But I think reading this book helped my brain in all those situations, because I continued to be optimistic. I continued to tell myself it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Everything will take care of itself. So obviously none of it had to do with cancer. So his situation was very different. But I liked how we started this chapter off with, again, you focus on the facts. You don't have hope. You don't have your opinions. You don't make assumptions and You look to the experts. You have the experts tell you what's going on right now and what do I need to do next. Daniel, I'll start with you. What are your initial thoughts going into chapter 2?
So you said exactly kind of what I was thinking as well, with the whole connecting it back to the facts, and it's everything needs to be fact based when he wasn't wanting to look at the computer screen. And I really, that totally makes sense, because you're gonna go down this WebMD search of, okay, it's just gonna be naturally just really bad. So just going out and just, what did I wrote, go out and do stuff. Just him, the doctor even said, don't let this diagnosis stop you from doing things. Go out and go to that game, or go out and go to whatever certain event. And I also wrote down, I don't know if this was chapter 2 or 3, but I think this question was kind of, I think it hits both chapters, is what is needed by me at this moment, or something along those lines, where I thought that was perfect, because you're just putting yourself into the facts of what's currently going on right now and how it can change the situation to make it more neutral, instead of thinking down the line where it's positive or negative. How can I control the situation right now?
Patrick?
I the story and the data part was what I really kind of gravitated toward. It's because I actually used that with um, some of the men's groups I'm in, but also with like some of my students. And with some of the work that I do in these other groups, there's so often where we will go to the story that we create around very little actual like data. And so we have to, so I will have to remind myself when I get into these places, just like I do when I work with my students, or when I work with these other people and these other kind of therapy type groups that I'm involved with, is in the absence of actual data, our brain will fill in the gaps. We'll fill in the gaps and create the story. And that's, I feel like what he's trying to say is what then leads us into very negative thinking. Like, for instance, when he talked about the charts and not looking at those things. Well, yeah, because if he looks at it without actually, or WebMD searches, without having an expert opinion, he's going to create, well, the worst case scenario. And so I really thought a lot about when I was listening to that. It really made me think back to how many times I've actually used that for myself, for my students, and for other people. And it really does force you to really put the brakes on the negativity and the out of control thinking and overthinking, because you have to stop and think, what's actually going on here? What is the actual information that I have? What's the actual data? And then like process it through that lens instead of the story you create around it.
Rhonda, thoughts? You're currently on mute.
Sorry. That's because I'm noisy otherwise. But I think for me, like, it just reminds, like, everything he says is to stop and take a step back before you react, which is, and I mean, I've worked with athletes all my lives and all my life, and there's been, different times where, sometimes you want to kill some of them because of the way they're acting, and you always have to like take a step back and kind of try to see where they're coming from, to kind of get you to that neutral space, and not, I would say, like, on the flip side, like he talked a lot, or you guys talked a lot of in the podcast about, how people say think positive and stuff like that. On the flip side of that is to just not be negative, but just stay in a space where you can have some hope.
Absolutely. I'll go on with page 38 continues. He talks about, I couldn't worry about the finish line. I could only focus on a few feet ahead of the start. I only wanted information I absolutely needed in that moment. Exploring too many possibilities can lead to fear and panic. So again, goes perfectly back to neutral thinking and not allowing yourself, well, I have to do these 15 things in the next 5 minutes or else I can't go home right now, or else I have to stay at work and get all this stuff done. I mean, I've written way too many sub plans this year, being sick and being on paternity leave, and I mean, we already have 100 things at school, let alone preparing a different teacher to be in your room for X amount of days. So I think that's what popped into my head right away. Was instead of thinking, well, I have to plan for these 5 subjects right now, kind of just I like to go on the timeline of my day and just run through it, because then I also don't miss very many things. And I know that's just a specific situation, and he's more so talking about doctor's appointments, but I think exploring too many possibilities can lead to fear, and panic can be any situation at all. So I'm going to move to kind of further into the chapter, page 48. One of my favorite parts of this whole book, because it kind of reiterates how I prefer to live my life, and it's, I guess, not really how I read this book, but this is kind of just how I've been taught how to live my life and how I preferred how to live my life. He returns to a yoga class and feels fantastic, and the one I highlighted was finding joy is a choice. Finding joy is a choice. He says, remember, neutral thinking isn't emotionless thinking. It's a way to process information to help make better decisions. Decisions that lead to happiness, decisions that make you want to celebrate. And I'll go back to it. Finding joy is a choice. I know all of us, because I know much about several of us here, love going to work out. And there's a sign at my gym that says, you're here. That was the first step. And, I have 2 kids, busy. We're all busy, but I mean, there's days where I'm home alone and I'm like, I need to go to the gym. And an hour later, I'm like, or I could sit down here and take a nap, even though the gym makes me feel great, puts me in a better mood, gets all the wonderful endorphins floating around, that sort of thing. But I also go back to the icky COVID era, because he talks about COVID era a lot in this chapter and in this book. But there are so many people in this world who, and I know all of you can name some. I know my mom can name some, because she's probably thinking the same people I am right now. But there are so many people during COVID that we'd be like, well, go for a walk, go for a jog, go outside, do something. Well, I don't do that. I can't do that. Why? like, go to a movie, go hang out with friends. Well, I don't do that. But that's your choice. And people still, obviously, COVID, hopefully not around anymore, if we want to call it that. But again, finding joy is a choice, and finding, whether it's with people, whether it's with your family, whether it's by yourself, finding something to celebrate, as he says, is always a choice. And hopefully, sometimes we don't get to make those choices because there's other things that we have to do that are important in the moment. And I'm sure some of those still bring you joy, but I think the big sentence I highlighted in this one is, of course, finding joy is a choice. So I'll go reverse here. Rhonda, what are your thoughts on any other things in chapter 2?
No, I just kind of relating this to what I do every day is like, hang on, Titter, you got to move. This, and I guess I've always done this when working with, I mean, right now I do rehab with different ages of people, and I have some people who like to come see me and some people who are more of a challenge. And I think with each of them, like when I leave my office to go see them, there are some that I'm like super excited to see, and some that I have to step back and go, somewhere there's a mother that loves this child, and right now I'm in charge and I have to make them better. And I have to find something good about what they're doing while I'm working with them. And that, I mean, that helps me approach them all fairly, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
Patrick?
You know me well enough to be like, this part of it, yeah, you know
I can't wait to hear this part.
No. It's actually, it's interesting because joy is a choice. Again, because of the work that I have done personally and the communities that I'm involved in, we talk about joy a lot in terms of its relationship to other emotions. And it made me think about one of the teachings that I learned in one of my groups that I also use. And we talk about your 4 core emotions. And they said oftentimes you, in that you oftentimes have to go through sometimes anger to get to joy or sadness to get to joy. And I think that's important, at least for me to remember, is that joy and happiness are quite different. They're related, but not the same, at least for me. And I think the point that he's trying to make is when joy is a choice, that doesn't mean that you don't have those other things. I'm sure at times he was very angry about his diagnosis and what was going on in the world while all that was going on. I'm sure that there were times where he was overcome with tremendous sadness. You can work through those things to get to joy. That honestly is where my struggle is because I kind of oscillate back and forth between sadness and anger quite a bit, just because of my personal situations growing up. So it is good. It's a good reminder to have somebody else saying like, yeah, you have to. It is a conscious choice, and I think that's also a big point. Is it's a choice. You have to choose it. It's active, right? It's not, joy is not a passive thing. So you have to work through some things to get to that.
Daniel?
I agree with what Patrick and Rhonda are saying, and even you. I mean, I just keep going back into the classroom of like every day is a new day. If you had an issue one day, the next day is just going to be, it's a fresh start. Yes, I mean, that's a positive way of thinking about it, but it's also just it's the ability to have, if you had a difficult day with a child, you can always take that time at the end of the day as you're driving home to reflect on the day and then start the next day fresh in order to alleviate any sort of situation. And just bring that mental clarity back to being grounded in the situation. That's kind of how I took it. Just that mindset of that question is, what is needed by me at this moment? Go outside and take a breath, reflect, uh, decompress, go work out, or do something just to kind of clear your mind, and then come back the next day ready to give it 100%, 110%. That's what we give.
So we'll finish chapter 2 up with a flashback to COVID era again. This chapter actually kind of makes me cringe sometimes when I read it because of having to think of how icky, or how, I mean, many of us tried to be optimistic, but as this book has showed you, you had to have the right mindset in the time. Right now, it's really easy, sorry, to look back and go, I handled that well, I didn't handle that well, because life is essentially back to normal now. But a few questions I'd like to ask everybody to answer, because I'm sure you probably pondered it as you were reading this, and I have a more specific question for Rhonda based on her being employed on a college campus at that very time. But for everybody to think about, reflect on, and share your thoughts, how did you personally handle the COVID era, whether you want to call it a year, whether you want to call it over a year, whatever it may be? What were you able to figure out or adjust to with ease? Sorry, the sickness is coming back. And is there anything you learned or tried? Like, did you try something new? Did you learn a new skill? The talking is starting to add up here. And then I'm going to start with Rhonda, because during the COVID era, she was employed as an athletic trainer on a college campus. So, Mom, everything you did was either limited with people, limited with time, limited with calendar, that sort of thing. So, at the time, could you flash back maybe, or even reflect right now on how the campus, how the coaching staff, how the department handled it in the situation, and did they look at it in a good way, or do you look back now and go, we did not do that so well? Thoughts on that?
Oh boy, that's just loaded. I, as an athletic trainer, did a lot of things that were not within my scope of practice. Our athletic director, I wish Coach Silbernagel was on for this, because Coach Silbernagel and our athletic director and I wrote our COVID policies, and Coach Silbernagel and the athletic director went through them, and then we decided what was, what we would use and what we wouldn't use. Obviously, we had guidance from the NCAA, not really guidance. They were telling us what to do, and then some from the conference, but a lot of meetings. And I mean, it took like the meetings and the writing of policies and figuring out how we were going to do things just to bring kids back to campus so that they could start training in the summer. Like, I mean, we had to make we had 2 doors to the weight room, and one had to be an entrance and one had to be an exit. So we had to train people. You're going to come up the stairs, you're going to go in this door, and then when you leave, you're going to go out this door, and you're going to go around and go down the other stairs. Like, we had to map everything out. We had, I wrote, I wrote a CLIA waiver, which is basically a waiver that is you send to the federal government, and they approved us to be a testing site so that we could do our own testing. And like, I had to I ordered about $50,000 worth of tests, and 2 weeks later found out that our governor was able to get us tests for free. So I mean, it was like I was doing COVID tests, I was organizing all the COVID tests, and I think the thing that it taught me the most is maybe some patience, but just to step back and try to understand where everybody else was coming from. I mean, we had a mask mandate, and we're working with kids between the ages of 18 and 22 who are hearing all kinds of things from home. And so just trying to get people to follow our rules that we had to put in place. It's like, it was like, please don't kill the messenger. I'm the one that had to enforce everything. And we were just doing it. And so over and over and over again, we kept saying, we're doing this so that we can have a season, so that we can play. And then the emotions of the kids. I mean, it was like, we thought we were going to be able to play that fall of 2020. And then about 2 weeks before we were supposed to be able to start playing, we were told we're not playing. And so, I mean, it was an emotional roller coaster constantly with, and trying to be supportive of the kids, but understanding where they were coming from. And we all just wanted to get back to normal. I had a I had a dad call me and just chew my butt over some of our policies. And I mean, just the different things that we had to handle, that you're just like, wow, it was a lot. It was a lot. And that fall, when kids came back to campus, our school nurse and I, like, we did all of our own tracing after somebody tested positive. I mean, and we've got freshman kids living in the dorms, and somebody tests positive, then all of a sudden now we've got a contact trace. We had a dorm that was for isolation, and these kids were put in these rooms in isolation, and we tried to explain to our administrators that they didn't need their own room once they tested positive, because once they were positive, they could be around the other people that tested positive. And like, just trying to educate people. And then my favorite part was, I had 2 kids, 2 freshman football players, the night before they're going to get out of isolation in the dorm. And like, we took them food from the cafeteria. And these 2 kids in particular were super picky eaters. And one of our coaches would go into town and get them like Chick-fil-A once in a while and stuff like that, because they didn't like what was being offered, because the cafeteria would put boxes together to take up to the dorm. And the night before these kids are getting out of isolation, they jumped out of a 2nd-story window and took some girl's car that they had permission to take to go to McDonald's and get some food. And they were climbing back into the dorm at like a little after midnight, and the RA in charge caught them, and she was just devastated that they would even think about this. And so then I had to bring it all up and discipline them. And I was talking to our school nurse about it. I'm like, the dumbasses, they went out a 2nd-story window and went all the way into town, because University of Mary is like 6 miles out of town. And I said, they went to McDonald's. I'm like, I would understand if they would have gone to a party, but they went to McDonald's. So, but yeah, it was crazy. It was a crazy time. I don't know how we got through it, because we were working constantly. I was short staffed. And I mean, it is probably the main thing that made me, like, towards the end of my job at UMary, it is some of that stuff is probably what made me look back and say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. It was just a lot.
Patrick, thoughts, challenges, anything you learned, anything you adjusted to with ease?
When it in 2020, when we were basically everything was shutting down, and it was kind of, he said this in the book. He mentions this about, you know people were optimistic that it was, in a couple weeks we're going to get back to things. There was a little bit of that. There was another, camp that was a little more pessimistic, I guess. I guess for me, when it first happened, it was almost, I felt a bit like, oh wow, like an extra vacation. And then once we started to realize, Mom, there's something more to this. I started thinking about like how it affects my kids. Like, so not as my personal kids. So as a father, I had a high schooler, I had a sophomore in high school, and then I had a middle school student. And I just really was thinking about how this has affected them. So for instance, for my older son, we had just had an amazing cross country season. He'd won a state championship, and we were really primed for track season. We were super excited about track season. We had this high, just all the excitement coming out of cross with that accomplishment, and we were ready. And then everything shuts down. No track season for either of them. Everything that they enjoyed and their friends all canceled. Prom gone. Graduation basically gone. The track season, of course, gone. Church shut down. Youth group shut down that they were involved in. All their summer camps of 2020, all everything that they did for with all of their youth groups and athletic groups, everything. And I remember thinking, like, how do we get through this? How do I provide something as an alternative to the things that they were not going to have? And we made it, obviously, and we did find some ways to kind of help minimize the impact of that. But just for our family, just personally, it was just a very weird time of me trying to somewhat teach remotely from home, and them trying to do remote things, and my wife, with her job, she was in one room. It really just was, it was a surreal experience, that almost dreamlike. Like when I think back on it, I almost have it almost like I'm recalling a dream of things that didn't really happen, but they really did. And but as I said, despite all the things that were being taken away, we did find ways to adjust. Yeah, that's when I just said, all right, well, the gym is shut down. And I had a trainer at that time, and my trainer was having, those types of careers were really on the line, because those are for people with expendable money, right? Trainers and things like that. So we just dropped back and punted on that. And we said, okay, well, the gym shut down where I trained. And I literally was going to my trainer's house twice a week to keep my training going. And he has in his house like a miniature, like little room that had some free weights, a treadmill, a couple of other things. And for about 2 months, my training was in his house, because I had to keep up with that. And then I just increased my running, and I joined a running group. That was when I joined my running group, because again, I was like, I have to stay active, because me staying at home and watching the doom scroll that is, news would be detrimental to my mental health. So I found every opportunity to get out. And that's when I joined that running group that I'm still somewhat a part of now. And I mean, in some ways it probably helped me, from a health standpoint, physically. But I just had to adapt. I mean, I just couldn't just sit around and just kind of wallow in the misery of what could be. So
And the fact that you allowed yourself to do that is a big mental thing too. Is getting out of your house was probably a big mental thing that helped you a lot in the long run as well. Daniel, thoughts and reflections on the good old COVID era?
Good old COVID era. I mean, the biggest things that I think back to when I think of COVID is just teaching from home, air quotes. Um, Dropping your classroom on a Monday or whatever day you guys left school and moving it to my bedroom in my parents' house because I was still looking for a house at the time, which was a huge challenge because that did not happen. So that was postponed for about a year or so. So just the adjustments of teaching in a classroom to not even online, just it's paper packets, and kids were supposed to come to school, do a drive-by pickup with packets, and the kids weren't doing them. I had no idea what was in them. Um, Trying to call parents at home, no one answering. So it was like, what is my job? That was also a huge challenge. You didn't really know what your job was at the time, but you were still getting paid, so you felt like you had to do something. Um, it was to a point where when we were back at school in August of 2021, we had to work from the classroom, which I was appreciative of because it allowed me to get out 5 days a week. It made me had a purpose of going to school. Um, and I was able to see my coworkers. Yes, we couldn't really be in the same room together, or our team meetings were on Zoom, but at least I was at my place of work, which was helpful. And what was also nice is that my district also allowed us to schedule the week before school starting um, parent teacher conferences. We were able to meet with the kids, get their computers, get everything hooked up, so we were able to see the kids. But I was also fortunate enough that I had the same group of sixth graders. Not that I just had, but it was a really good group of kids that I just had in sixth grade, well, like over a year, um, who I had them again in eighth grade. So I also had the adjustment of changing grade levels during COVID online. But I knew I was going to have amazing kids, so that adjustment was so easy. And I had an amazing teaching partner who I still work with today. Um, so it just there were challenges, but I mean I was living at home. My brother was in Idaho. My other brother was in Fresno. We we were all healthy. My parents obviously had to close our store, um, but we thrived. I mean, we were doing those backhand deal businesses on Facebook and meeting people in the back of our store. I mean, we were doing everything we can to kind of make sense of the situation, but also provides people with um, new shoes. Got to get those athletes and gym rats some shoes. Um, but it's just the success story of getting through it. And once the kids came back to school, I was back every day. The kids were there 100%. I had all my students back. I mean, it became like natural. It was such like an emotional day when they arrived back at school. And I mean, like I said, it was a great class. I didn't want the year to end. It just went by so quick. The first trimester was on Zoom. Um, I had a special place. That class has a special place in my heart. I mean, went through so much with that group of kids. They're graduating from high school this year, and I just saw a couple of them. They presented to my eighth graders this year. So, I mean, it's just for as horrible as COVID was, and for me, and with not as horrible for me, but like the challenging of switching and my life up, basically. I mean, it ended pretty well. I mean, with just the success of just getting back to the classroom as a regular teacher.
Absolutely. So many thoughts and different angles and perspectives on this as each of you talk. My mom was talking about college football, of course, and I thought immediately back to when Patrick and his boys were in town visiting, and Wesley and Brent and I were talking about college football and how during COVID, obviously the pep bands weren't allowed to be there, and we're like, just wasn't the same. College football is not the same without the band in the background. And I know there's a lot more to sports than a pep band, but anybody who's obsessed with college football knows that it's different when there's a pep band there. So I remember there was a guy I taught fourth grade with. He's not at Lincoln anymore, but he was big into the world news, and he said the day before we got kicked out of school, he said, this stuff's going to get ugly. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. No one's really talking about it. It's just been on the news, whatever. And literally an hour later, a guy comes by and pops his head in the door and says, the March Madness NCAA tournament just got canceled. And I'm like, holy cow, things are getting weird here. I think from a teacher standpoint, it made me realize how many kids don't have much or anything. I remember the moment we got kicked out of schools. I want to do everything because I knew how to Zoom call, I knew how to Teams call, I knew how to set up Google Classroom, get kids set up on that. And my principal kept telling us, don't do anything because half these kids don't have computers, and the ones who do, some of them don't have Wi-Fi. And for me to have to think about that, or having 6 kids in a building all on the same crappy Wi-Fi, changes a lot of things. As much as I absolutely love my wife and kids, not sure how I would have survived with a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old during that time. They would have probably driven me crazy once or twice. But yeah, I think the lack of home support during that time, we had a big parade through Lincoln with the teachers so that we could see all the kids. And anybody who knows me, I'm a big people person. I feed off of people. I feed off of crowds. So not being able to see those people in person hurt me bad. From just the kind of look ahead that we've talked about so many times, I didn't enjoy COVID era at all because I am a people person, and not being allowed to go out and be in a group of people hurt bad. But I don't think I was like, all these people they never really talked about a finish line, and nobody really knew anything. There wasn't one person who everyone looked to for answers because nobody had answers. So I don't think my brain was really affected in that because, again, it was just my wife and I at home. Like, we kind of just did what we did and did what we wanted to, and that was that. And you did work stuff when you needed to. You had deadlines and you got it done whenever that was. But I mean, my mom and I went on several bike rides, and I'd leave the house and my wife would say, where are you going? No idea. Be back in a while. No idea. Because we weren't on a timeline. And getting out of the house and exercising because you couldn't go to the gym was the happy place. And obviously much needed as many times in a row. Probably went to my buddy's house for a few drinks, a few too many times, but who didn't? But yeah, I had so many thoughts come to my head, and I think I handled it okay. It definitely was a massive adjustment. I think my wife and I binge watched The Good Doctor like 4 seasons in a row one day, and now every time I hear that theme song, it kind of triggers. Not like a negative one, but I'm like, oh, it's Good Doctor. I don't want to watch this, because I remember just sitting there reading books and doing school stuff, and The Good Doctor's playing in the background because she'd be watching it. So, but yeah, needing my people was a big one. I know I asked you guys all anything new that you learned or tried because you had the time to, if you want to call it that. Anyone who knows me, I went to Shields right away and I bought a smoker, and that's the skill that I built on. And I absolutely, well, I can't call myself a master chef because I'm a master chef if there's a smoker or an Instapot in the house, and that's about it. But I feel like Patrick and my mom have both experienced some brisket and ribs along the way. So I feel like I'm benefiting a few more people than just myself. But anybody else have anything you tried out, anything you learned along the way with all the time we had on our hands?
I had all these coffee recipes on TikTok. I tried those. They weren't good, but
I tried a few different recipes and just made a few like different things that I made scones. I'd never made scones, but the biggest thing I did is I started sewing. I sewed a little bit when I was growing up, but not much. I was always outside. My sisters were sewing, but I started making some quilts, and that's something that I'm still not super good at it, but I still do it.
I didn't do anything. I mean, I can't think of anything that I tried different.
You continued to do what made you happy, though. You talked about going to the gym and you continued. So that's huge. You didn't make excuses for yourself.
I started, I upped my the amount of miles I was running.
There you go. It's way more than I did. That's all right. All right. We will move into chapter 3. I can get it to go here. There we go. Chapter 3, taking the right next step. It starts by talking about this guy who kind of creates his own business. It goes pretty much worldwide rather quickly because of the success of it. This business is more so instead of elderly individuals going into nursing homes and that sort of setting, they send people into their actual homes so they can live a comfortable life in their own comfortable home setting, if you will. I highlighted the daily checklist that he had because, again, it's in a time like this where nobody really knew anything. I find it very impressive how these people were able to focus in on what they needed to and kind of create that for themselves, because again, they didn't know what this was, where this is going, how long this is going to be. Um, but this guy's daily checklist says read the plan of the day, execute your assignment, take care of your family, and focus on the now. So, got to mute myself before I die over here. So I don't know how many corporations caught on quickly about kind of just this way of thinking and helping themselves at that moment. Any thoughts to start off on chapter 3? Patrick, I'll start with you this time.
I actually wrote down the know the next right thing. That was a big thing. But I actually wanted to talk. We're talking about the checklist. I think people are sleeping on the checklist a lot because they see it as maybe like too rigid. And I used to be that way. I used to be a person like, I am not gonna use the checklist. But over the past year and a half, maybe past 2 years, maybe, my wife has really got me on board with a checklist. She's in the business world, and I mean, for her, it's basically essential. I Ever since I've been I started using a checklist. I start my day at school. When I get there, I get to school about 6:15. Our school day starts at 7:30. Students start walking in the door at 7:15. So I get there about an hour before the kids do. It's quiet. There's no one in the building. It's completely quiet. And I get in, and the first thing I do, besides just kind of starting everything up and getting lamps and all that mess turned on and whatever, is I have like a little notebook, right? And I just start writing down all the things that I need to do during the day. And it just gives me like 5 minutes to just kind of organize and plan out. And then I just start knocking things off of that list. And there is a huge difference for me in the way that I approach task management because of that, and just how I feel about what I have accomplished, because I can look, and that, of course, I'm just adding to it, throughout the day. But just starting the day with saying, okay, here are 4 or 5 things that I know I have to get done, and I can just mark off as I do them. It just really helps me not kind of go all over the place and overthink. As a chronic overthinker, you almost get paralysis of, by not knowing how to tackle when to tackle it. So the daily checklist, or checklist at that is big for me right now.
It may or may not be exactly how I was born and raised with checklists, because that's literally the only way I get anything done. I have an hour of prep on Wednesday mornings, and it's possibly my favorite hour of the entire week, because Monday and Tuesday after school, I usually write down everything that I need to do. Otherwise, I'll sit at my chair and go, what were the 50 things I needed to do? And I sit there and do nothing. So yes, I absolutely am on board with checklists. It's not because COVID created that in me. It's just I've always been a checklist person. When I'm home alone, when my wife and kids are out of town, if there's something I need to do, I write it down. And I think the glory of getting to cross it off the list is also very satisfying for people who are checklist people. So I completely agree with you in that sense. Was there something else you wanted to add there, Patrick? I know you mentioned something beforehand.
Is that a leading question, sir? The next right thing, right? Again, from a therapeutic standpoint, from a counseling standpoint, that is really, really good, solid advice, right? Don't think about too many steps ahead of where you are, which, again, as I've said, as a chronic overthinker, I'm not in the here and the now. I'm thinking 5 things down And what ends up happening is if I'm looking at 5 things down the road, I'm not really looking at what are the things I need to do to get to that. And I'm not really great at it yet. But I do find myself stopping when I feel a bit overwhelmed with everything going on. Of thinking, okay, what do I need to do right now? Again, this is where my wife comes in clutch because her brain is just wired for this, right? She is okay, what's the next thing you need to do to get to that? I'm a big ideas guy. We've planned, our family has thrived for our whole marriage on, I come up with a big, huge idea for whatever it is, the family vacation, an event, a party, or whatever we're doing, big idea. And then she is able to break it down into, okay, first this, second this. And then she kind of helps me, and she's helped me kind of develop a bit more of a mindset. And again, that's where I get the checklist from, of knowing like, okay, the next thing that I need to do is this to get me ultimately something down the road. Again, I'm not a master of it, but much better than I used to be.
Rana, initial thoughts on chapter 3?
I really like the focus on the now. One thing we used to say a lot to our team when I was out at UMary is be where your feet are. As far as the checklists and stuff like that, you get the checklist thing from your dad. I call them Lance lists. Um, I I have a checklist, but it's in my head, and I check them off as I do them. I was just telling somebody this today. Like when I leave my office during the at night, like I look at my schedule for the next day, and then I have a picture of it in my head, and so I know exactly what I'm doing every hour tomorrow. Like, and when I get up tomorrow morning, it'll still be there. I do have a rule with the things that um, the list that I have, my checklist that I think works really well for me. And that is, I try to do the thing that I really don't want to do first. So I get that out of the way because then the rest of it is easy. Or the thing that's going to take the longest, I'll do first because then it just makes the rest of my day go easier. Um, I love the Coach John Wooden stories. I was able to hear him speak. He actually came out to University of Mary few years back, and he came into our training room, and it was kind of cool to meet him. He was really old then, but he was still really interesting to listen to. So I really like that part of chapter 3. So yeah.
Daniel, initial thoughts, chapter 3?
So I was just reflecting back to the whole, if I do checklists for like my daily life, like not like for work, and I don't, which is quite bizarre because I live off of them. I thrive off them in the classroom. I create a daily agenda. And if the kids finish the task, and I say, you're going to do this, this, and this in this order. So I thrive on them in the classroom, but at home, surprisingly, I don't, which is bizarre. And another thing that I kept coming back to, I get the COVID backstories and the sports just because of his history, but I always try to connect it back to something that I experienced or have been told growing up. And I think the chapter title is like best fit for this quote that I've heard all my life. Well, not all my life, but just throughout high school. We all know the quote, practice makes perfect, right? Well, no one can, from what I was told, no one can't really be perfect, but with practice, you can become permanent at something. So that kind of goes back to the whole neutral thing. And in order to become neutral or to establish those routines to get to that point, you have to be permanent in what you practice in order to get to that point at some point in your life. So that's kind of how I was hearing practice makes permanent all throughout this chapter, and I even have it above my classroom door as they leave. That's just kind of what I was connecting back to.
It's interesting. It's interesting you use that phrase, "The practice makes perfect," because in our classroom, we our variation of that phrase is practice makes progress.
Uh,
So that's what we use in our classroom is practice makes progress. And we also use the phrase, don't let perfect get in the way of progress, which I think is applicable in this because so many times people, again, because they can't think of the next right step or they don't really know what the next right step or they're afraid of what the next right step is, then they kind of stunt their possibility of getting better because they're thinking, or they might be thinking, well, I'm not going to be perfect at it, so why bother? And I'm not as good, so I'm going to not even try. I'm not even going to try to progress. So that's what we say in our. It's funny that you say that. We practice makes progress, and don't let perfect get in the way of progress. Are two phrases that my kids will probably, if they come to my funeral, they're going to have it engraved on my headstone. So
I mean, I had mentioned that quote today in class because I just had a student just staring out the door, and I'm like, it's like it's like, look at your grades. You've done nothing. It's like it's hard for me to help you with this. It's like there's no progress being made. And it's like you're living here. You're literally sitting here for the last 15 minutes, just staring out the door. I said, you're I said you struggle a lot because you don't take this time to make those chances, make those mistakes. Instead, you're just going to sit there and do this at home when you're going to have your mom help you, or you're going to use AI, you're going to use Google to get all these answers. And I tell the kids, it's like, I know when you use that stuff. So try it now in the classroom when you're given the time. That way I can support you in this. But it's that they don't, some of the students in my class, they don't use the practice, which makes them to have that progress to get to get permanent. It's a hard concept to teach my middle school students, especially going into high school. It's just a very tough thing to teach. I mean, kids. I mean, I learned this when I was in high school, but it was just I had that mindset already from my parents. So it's really I don't know. It's yeah. But I do want to say, um, I am going to have to leave this call just because of timing. I do need to have dinner. So it is dinner time, kind of. And I just kind of got home from work. So I'm going to leave, but I've appreciated this call. I've learned a lot. I look forward to the next one.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I absolutely wanted to connect with the coach John Wooden because anybody who knows me, I absolutely love John Wooden. One of the quotes that the female coach within the story is talking about, when she's talking to Coach John Wooden, and anybody who was intelligent back then would have gone and sat down with him for a while. But she asked, should I tone that down as a coach? And she was talking about kind of being fiery and getting after it in her practices. And are my athletes like connecting to this? Are they responding to this? Am I missing something? And he simply said, you are uniquely crafted to be the kind of coach you are. And I connect that to how I coach. I connect that to, I guess, how I parent, and absolutely how I teach because I'm a very enthusiastic person. 9 times out of 10, my classroom is relatively loud, and it's not because we're out of control. It's because we're busy. Whenever I get the chance to have a practicum or a student teacher, I always tell them just do your thing, just be yourself, and no matter how weird, goofy, whatever is said, obviously school appropriate. Just let the passion fly. Just let your personality and your authenticity fly, and you'll have more fun. That's why you got into this profession is to be like this. I mean, I'm best friends with property managers and engineers and nurses and doctors, and I mean, I'm a personally say that I have more fun at my job than any of them. I mean, they all have different interests, but I have the coolest job in the world because I get to be me all day long, and kids and everyone around me embrace it and hopefully enjoy it. But I remember back when I podcasted with Jordan Wilhelm, who's the head basketball coach at Bismarck High, and I was asking him how difficult was it to replace a legend. He replaced Steve Miller, who coached at BHS for what, 20 to 30 years, I think, and went to just about every state tournament possible. And he said, yeah, there was some pressure, but It's my program now. Like, yeah, I carried on some things that he did, but I have to be myself. I have to add things like new, modernized things the way that I think a successful program will do and look like. I coach a little bit like he did because he coached me and that's what I know. But I also pick up my own styles as I go based on my style and based on my personality. And I also connected that to how I coach because I coach in the fall with my dad, who's been coaching in the league the league we coach in for almost 30 years. Now, do I agree with his overall philosophy? Absolutely. I'm very fortunate to coach with several guys who have a very good philosophy and mindset of how to coach youth football. Now, are there things I've thrown into the way we do things that have changed the last couple of years? Absolutely, because I think some modernized things, some new things make football fun and kids enjoy it, rather than doing any of the same thing over and over. Now, does that mean he's been doing it wrong? No, that's just how he chose to do it. And like I said, in teaching, there's 100 different ways to teach one math assignment or one math lesson. And I always tell pre-service and young teachers, you decide how you want to do it. The curriculum tells you what to teach. You decide how you teach it. So in the quote, when she asked, should I tone that down as a coach? And he immediately says, no, that's how you are crafted. That's how you've learned. That's what's made you the person you are today. Don't tone it back because one or two people might be intimidated. So yeah, I really, really connected with that story, and I really appreciate the words that I got from Coach Wilhelm when I got the chance, because it's definitely made an impact on me as a coach and a teacher in the classroom. So the last point I'm going to touch on in chapter 3, and then I'll ask you guys if you have anything else you'd like to talk about with chapter 3. I think we talked about this a little bit, but what does this situation require of me? And this kind of goes back to kind of any let me go back to what quotes. I'm kind of just the now, focusing on the now, what I need to do now. I know Patrick talked about how he struggles with looking at step 6 and not starting at step 1 and 2, and then it gets overwhelming immediately. As teachers, we are currently looking at middle of year data. I haven't been in school most of the week due to sickness. We have conferences next week. God forsaken Valentine's Day next Friday. Like, chaos is everywhere in my brain right now. My wife and kids will go to work and daycare tomorrow, and I'm literally gonna plan out my all next week just so my brain can like neutralize and chill for a little bit. But I'm again training my brain based on this book to what do I need to do now so that that step 2 and step 3, step 4 get easier. That sort of thing. He says you get to the heart of the matter, blocks out all external distractions. It doesn't concern itself with the actions of others because you don't control that. All we control is what we do next. And I know, Patrick, you being in a school setting, and my mom also previously being in a school setting. Patrick and I more so in an elementary school. We all have the employees, and this time of year and moving closer to March, April, and May, the negativity sets in North Dakota. The weather gets nicer. Just less and less people every week want to be in the building because of the time of year it is. So kind of blocking out, making your own decisions because you control your decisions, not falling into that negativity, not falling into the complaining about this kid and complaining about this kid, and this kid never does anything right. And this time of year, I have sticky notes all over my desk just for my be positive, look for the positive things, quit harping on all of these kids that you think are doing things wrong when all these kids doing things right. Just kind of sit in the corner in the shadows. So the quote on page 70 again, what does this situation require of me? Just a lot going on this time of year for any educator in a school building, but being able to sit down and realize, what do I need to do now? What can I do next week? What can wait for a couple weeks? That sort of thing really resonates with my brain. And that's why I love to read this book this time of year, because it prepares me for March. It prepares me for April and May, and the crazy spring months. So, Patrick, I'll start with you quick. Any other thoughts as we start to close out chapter 3?
I mean, no, I mean, just nothing necessarily new or profound, other than, I would just reiterate, kind of tagging along with what you were saying about, kind of in the vein of kind of be your own person, right? what's the next right step for me, depending on the situation, could be very different than what would be the next right step for you or somebody else. There's lots of, and the next right, we might be approaching the same type of situation, but because we're different people and the way we approach things are different, it doesn't always have to be exactly the same. And in a way that can be scary for some people because they're just like, I just want the answer. I just want to know what to do. And then in some ways it could be quite liberating because it does, in the situation of the coach that is, when she was asking like, okay, am I too, much? I think maybe I'm missing, maybe I'm reading two books at one time, so maybe I'm confusing the two, but did he not say that he was like something like that's not necessarily my like how I do things, but I also surround myself with people that are like that, like I have assistants and other people who are maybe more assertive and aggressive, or however he phrased it in that way. I'm really taking some liberties with the author's words here, but I think the point of what I'm trying to say with that is style is very personal with how you do it. You're alluding to your classroom, like that would drive me absolutely bananas, right? Just because that is a lot of extra noise. Lots of noise is problematic for how I process things. Whereas it would drive you probably absolutely bananas to be in my classroom that is much more subdued and quiet. However, both of those things can happen and still produce quality. And, if we're focused on our, like, what we need to do in this situation and less on like, well, what would Kyler do in this situation, or what, because our styles are different. I think it could be very freeing to just allow us to kind of be, like you said, be who you want to be, who you need to be, and not who you think you should be because someone else tells you that.
I laugh because the group I have right now is I enjoy my group right now, and I try not to compare them to any others, but my favorite group ever, and they're obviously my favorite because I had them for 2 years, so I literally decided to loop to 5th grade with them, along with one of the groups I had in Hazen. But this group I have this year, they have a good sense of humor, but you can't joke with them, or else be prepared for the next 25 minutes of your day to be about absolutely nothing. Because they'll start telling you stories about how they went to Taco Bell in 2nd grade, and I'm like, I don't know what that has to do with my 2-year-old, but sure. And then my favorite groups, like I could be sarcastic with them all day long, and they would tag along, and then the second everyone decided, okay, we're back to it, we could flip a switch. And obviously not every class has that capability, but I just know my class this year, I'll stand there and be like, is everyone, I don't even know what you guys are talking about anymore. We're so off the rails right now, and it happened again on Monday when I hardly had a voice at all, and my practicum teacher's probably looking around like, you guys aren't really productive during the day. I'm like, no, I just make a side joke, and 18 of them take it 18 different directions, and now I don't know what's happening in this room. So, aside from your, just the different styles, I thought of, I went to a keynote speaker years ago, and a friend of mine afterwards was like, that guy was crazy. He was on something, and I'm like, I loved it. That guy's energy was awesome. And even on Twitter during football season, all these people who love Pat McAfee or hate Pat McAfee. I mean, again, he's an energy guy, so I love him, but I'm like, he's passionate and he's a pretty smart dude. So I just laugh at the style thing because those are my people. Not necessarily like I need to be loud, I don't need a microphone, I'm just gonna scream on TV. That's not what I enjoy, because there's certain analysts that do that and I don't enjoy that. But just the passionate, maybe somewhat over the top, yeah, the wild stuff is my kind of stuff, the enthusiasm stuff. Rhonda, any other thoughts on chapter 3 before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I think I covered it.
Patrick, anything else?
No, I'm good, man.
All right, I'm just chugging water over here so my trachea doesn't close on me.
Keep chugging.
It's been a fun week, man. Fun week. All right. Well, thank you to our listeners, viewers, for joining us for chapters 2 and 3. We will be back in about a month. Hopefully, we can find some time in March with March Madness reading month taking place. I know in my life, in my school, and just in the world in general. I know Patrick has tagged along with some awesome book bracket stuff. We have teachers starting to pick some books for book brackets, so I'm really jazzed to get that stuff rolling. And then March hits, and then I'm like absolute chaos everywhere. But I think I've gotten to manage it a lot better by planning further ahead. But like I said, we have conferences next week for a week, and then Valentine's Day, so it's gonna be great. But all right, well, thank you guys for joining me for another great book study, and we will be back in about a month for the next couple chapters.
All right. Sounds good.